We live in a world that celebrates achievement but quietly ignores exhaustion. We applaud growth while overlooking the cost of getting there. We chase power, titles, metrics, and momentum. And yet, despite all of it, so many people feel anxious, disconnected, and unfulfilled. So the real question is not how we are succeeding, but why it no longer feels like enough. Somewhere along the way, progress became louder than purpose, and speed replaced meaning. And when that happens, people may comply, but they stop believing. People do not wake up inspired by numbers on a dashboard. They do not give their best because of pressure, fear, or incentives alone. They give their best when they feel safe to speak, safe to fail, safe to be human. This is not a soft idea. It is a biological one. When people feel protected, they cooperate. When they feel threatened, they retreat. And yet, too many of our systems are built on fear of missing targets, fear of being replaced, fear of falling behind. We call it high performance, but what we are really doing is managing anxiety at scale. The most effective leaders have always understood something simple and profound. Leadership is not about being in charge. It is about taking care of those in your charge. Authority can force behavior, but it cannot inspire belief. Power can demand results, but it cannot earn trust. Trust is earned when leaders create environments where people feel seen, valued, and protected. That is why people follow those who make them feel safe, not because they are charismatic or confident, but because they are consistent, empathetic, and anchored in purpose. Burnout is not an individual failure. It is a systemic one. When people are overwhelmed, disengaged, or cynical, it is rarely because they lack resilience. It is because they are operating in systems that ask them to give endlessly without reminding them why it matters. We have built organizations optimized for efficiency, not humanity. We reward short-term wins and sacrifice long-term health. And then we act surprised when trust erodes, loyalty fades, and inequality deepens. Fear-based leadership can produce results briefly, but it always comes at a cost. It weakens relationships. It narrows thinking. It discourages honesty. Over time, it creates cultures where people protect themselves instead of each other. And when people are busy watching their backs, innovation stops, collaboration breaks down, and the system becomes fragile. Strong organizations are not built on pressure. They are built on trust. And trust grows when leaders are clear about their why. Starting with why is not about slogans or branding. It is about clarity of belief. It is about knowing what you stand for and being willing to act in service of it, especially when it is inconvenient. When people understand the purpose behind their work, discipline becomes natural. Accountability becomes shared. Sacrifice becomes meaningful. Purpose gives context to effort, and context transforms stress into contribution. This is not just about organizations. It is about society. Systems without purpose concentrate power and extract value. Systems with purpose distribute opportunity and create belonging. When leaders prioritize results over people, inequality grows and trust collapses. But when leaders prioritize people in pursuit of results, communities strengthen and progress becomes sustainable. The goal is not to be the best in the world. The goal is to be the best for the world. Hope is not passive optimism. Hope is responsibility. It is the decision to care. It is the courage to lead with empathy in environments that reward control. It is the willingness to think long-term in a culture addicted to immediacy. Each of us, regardless of title, has influence. And leadership is not a rank. It is a choice. A choice to listen. A choice to protect. A choice to build something that will outlast us. So the call to action is clear. Rediscover your why, not the version that sounds good, but the one that feels true. Build trust before demanding results. Measure success not only by what you achieve, but by who you become in the process. Create spaces where people feel safe to bring their whole selves, because that is where their best work lives. Think beyond the next quarter. Act together, not alone, and commit every day to serving something bigger than yourself, because when people feel safe, they do not just follow you, help them lead. People do not follow leaders because of titles, power, or position. They follow leaders because of how those leaders make them feel. And the feeling that matters most is safety, not comfort, not ease. Safety. The kind of safety that allows people to speak honestly without fear of punishment. The kind that allows them to admit mistakes without risking humiliation. The kind that tells them, silently but consistently, that they matter as human beings, not just as functions or resources. Authority can compel compliance, but it cannot create commitment. Fear can produce obedience, but it can never inspire loyalty. When leaders rely on authority, they create distance. When they rely on fear, they create silence. And silence is not alignment. Silence is self-protection. In fear-based environments, people do only what is required, say only what is safe, and think only in the short term. They conserve energy. They avoid risk. They stop caring beyond survival. From the outside, it may look like control. From the inside, it feels like erosion. Creativity shrinks. Trust disappears. And the organization becomes weaker precisely because it appears strong. Safety is not about lowering standards or avoiding accountability. In fact, the opposite is true. When people feel safe, they take responsibility. They hold themselves to higher standards because they believe in what they are contributing to. They push through difficulty because they know their effort has meaning. Safety creates ownership. Fear creates compliance. One builds resilient systems, the other builds brittle ones. Biologically, this is not philosophy. It is how human beings are wired. When people feel threatened or bodies shift into survival mode, cortisol rises, defensiveness increases, collaboration declines. When people feel protected, oxytocin increases, trust grows, cooperation becomes natural. Leaders who create safety are not being kind for moral reasons alone. They are being effective. They are working with human biology instead of against it. Authority-focused leadership often confuses control with stability. The logic sounds reasonable: tighter rules, stricter oversight, faster consequences. But what it actually produces is dependency. People wait to be told what to do. They stop thinking critically. They avoid responsibility because responsibility without safety feels like risk without reward. Over time, leaders complain that people are disengaged, unmotivated, or entitled without recognizing that the environment trained them to behave that way. Leaders who create safety do something fundamentally different. They prioritize trust before results, not instead of results. They understand that performance is an outcome, not a demand. They invest time in listening, not because it is polite, but because it is strategic. They communicate clearly, especially during uncertainty, because ambiguity fuels fear. They protect their people from unnecessary pressure, even when it costs them personally. And because of that protection, people give more than they are asked to give. Safety also changes how people relate to one another. In fear-based cultures, colleagues compete, blame, and withhold information. In safe cultures, they support, challenge, and share. The difference is not talent. It is leadership. People mirror the behavior that is modeled and rewarded. When leaders demonstrate empathy, humility, and consistency, those behaviors spread. When leaders model aggression, unpredictability, or indifference, fear becomes the norm. This is why people will endure hardship for leaders who make them feel safe, but abandon leaders who rely on authority the moment pressure increases. Safety creates loyalty that survives difficulty. Fear creates obedience that collapses under stress. History shows this repeatedly. The strongest movements, organizations, and communities are not built by the most dominant leaders, but by those who put the well-being of their people ahead of their own ego. Creating safety requires courage. It means resisting the temptation to lead through intimidation when results are at risk. It means accepting short-term discomfort to protect long-term trust. It means being accountable not only for outcomes, but for the human cost of achieving them. Leaders who choose safety understand that their role is not to be the smartest person in the room, but the one responsible for the room. People follow leaders who create safety because safety allows them to be brave. It allows them to contribute fully. It allows them to care. And when people care, they do extraordinary things not because they are forced to, but because they believe they are part of something worth protecting, something that sees them not as expendable assets, but as human beings whose trust is earned through consistency, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to their well-being. Burnout and disengagement are often treated as personal shortcomings. We tell people they need to be more resilient, more disciplined, better at managing their time or emotions. We offer workshops, wellness apps, and motivational slogans as if exhaustion were a mindset problem. But burnout is not a lack of strength. It is a signal, and disengagement is not apathy. It is self-protection. When large numbers of capable, committed people are exhausted and disconnected, the issue is not the individuals. It is the system they are operating in. Purposeless leadership creates environments where effort is demanded but meaning is absent. People are asked to work harder, move faster, and sacrifice more without understanding why any of it truly matters. Targets are set, metrics are tracked, and outcomes are rewarded, yet the deeper reason behind the work is either unclear or unconvincing. When leaders cannot articulate a meaningful why, work becomes transactional. People trade time and energy for compensation, but they stop investing emotionally. Over time, that emotional withdrawal becomes disengagement. Human beings are not designed to sustain effort indefinitely without meaning. We can endure pressure, long hours, and uncertainty when we believe our work serves something bigger than ourselves. But when the work feels disconnected from purpose, stress becomes corrosive, energy drains, motivation fades. What remains is obligation without inspiration. Burnout emerges not because people care too much, but because they care and see no lasting impact from their effort. In purposeless systems, leadership focuses on efficiency instead of humanity. Decisions are optimized for speed, cost, and short-term results. The human consequences are treated as secondary or invisible. People become units of output rather than contributors with values, emotions, and limits. When leaders talk about people's resources to be leveraged rather than lives to be supported, disengagement is inevitable. No one feels loyal to a system that does not feel loyal to them. Disengagement is often misunderstood as laziness or entitlement. In reality, it is a rational response to environments where speaking up feels unsafe and effort feels unrewarded beyond numbers. When people realize that their ideas are ignored, their well-being is optional, and their value is conditional, they stop offering more than what is required. This is not rebellion, it is survival. People conserve energy in systems that consume them without replenishment. Purpose-driven leadership does not eliminate stress, but it transforms how stress is experienced. When leaders are clear about why the work matters, pressure gains context. Sacrifice feels chosen rather than imposed. Challenges become meaningful rather than draining. People are more willing to stretch themselves when they trust that their leaders are stretching with them and for them. Without that trust, pressure feels exploitative, and burnout accelerates. Short-term thinking is one of the most damaging byproducts of purposeless leadership. Leaders chase quarterly numbers while ignoring long-term health. They reward output while neglecting sustainability. The result is a cycle where people are pushed to deliver at the expense of learning, rest, and growth. Eventually, performance declines, turnover rises, and leaders respond by increasing pressure, believing the solution to exhaustion is more effort instead of more meaning. Purposeless leadership also erodes dignity. When people do not see how their work contributes to a larger mission, they begin to question their own worth within the system. Work becomes something that takes from them rather than something they build. Over time, this disconnect affects not only productivity, but mental health, relationships, and identity. People do not burn out because they are weak. They burn out because they are asked to be strong for reasons they no longer believe in. The most dangerous aspect of burnout is that it spreads silently. Disengaged people rarely announce their withdrawal. They simply stop caring deeply. Innovation slows. Initiative disappears. Leaders misinterpret this as a talent problem or a generational issue, never recognizing it as a leadership failure. Purpose cannot be outsourced to HR or delegated to culture statements. It must be lived, protected, and reinforced by those at the top. When leaders operate without a clear sense of purpose, they unintentionally create systems that extract energy instead of cultivating it. People are left empty not because the work is hard, but because it feels hollow. Burnout is the cost of asking human beings to give their lives to goals that do not honor their humanity. And disengagement is what remains when people decide, quietly and rationally, that the system no longer deserves their full commitment. Trust is not a soft concept reserved for idealistic conversations about culture. It is a biological reality and a strategic necessity. Long before trust became a leadership buzzword, it was a survival mechanism. Human beings evolved to depend on one another, and the dependence required a sense of safety and reliability. When trust is present, the human body relaxes, the mind opens, and cooperation becomes possible. When trust is absent, the body prepares for threat, the mind narrows, and self-preservation takes priority over collective success. At a biological level, trust shapes how we think, feel, and behave. In environments where people feel trusted and protected, oxytocin levels rise, promoting bonding, generosity, and collaboration. People share information freely. They help one another without being asked. They take risks because they believe failure will not result in punishment or exclusion. In contrast, low-trust environments elevate cortisol, the stress hormone associated with fear and defensiveness. People become cautious, territorial, and reactive. Their primary goal shifts from contributing to surviving. These biological responses directly influence performance. High-performing teams are not defined by pressure or competition, but by psychological safety. When people trust their leaders and one another, they speak up sooner, identify problems faster, and learn from mistakes more effectively. Errors become opportunities for improvement rather than sources of shame. This accelerates growth and strengthens systems over time. Trust reduces friction. It allows energy to flow toward problem solving instead of protection. Strategically, trust is one of the most powerful advantages in organization. Community can possess. It lowers the cost of coordination. When trust is high, processes become simpler because people do not need excessive oversight, approvals, or controls. Decisions are made faster. Collaboration feels natural. In low trust systems, complexity increases. Rules multiply. Meetings expand. Bureaucracy grows as leaders attempt to manage risk through control rather than relationships. The irony is that these controls often create the very inefficiencies they were meant to prevent. Trust also determines how people respond to pressure. In moments of uncertainty or crisis, trust acts as a stabilizer. People are more willing to endure hardship when they believe leaders are acting with integrity and in their best interest. They assume positive intent. They stay engaged even when outcomes are uncertain. Without trust, the same pressure triggers panic, blame, and withdrawal. Resilience is not built through toughness alone. It is built through relationships that provide confidence and reassurance when conditions are difficult. Performance driven by trust is fundamentally different from performance driven by fear. Fear-based performance relies on external motivation, rewards, punishments, and constant monitoring. It can produce short-term gains, but it is fragile. The moment incentives change or pressure increases, behavior shifts. Trust-based performance is internally motivated. People push themselves because they believe in the mission and in the people they are working with. This creates consistency, even when no one is watching. Trust also enhances adaptability in rapidly changing environments. Rigid control becomes a liability. Organizations that rely on trust empower people at all levels to make decisions aligned with shared values. This distributed leadership allows systems to respond quickly and intelligently to new challenges. When trust is absent, decision-making becomes centralized and slow. Leaders hesitate to delegate. Employees hesitate to act. Opportunities are missed not because of a lack of talent, but because of a lack of confidence in one another. Resilience is often misunderstood as endurance. In reality, resilience is the capacity to recover and grow stronger after disruption. Trust is what makes that recovery possible. When people trust their leaders, they are more likely to be honest about what went wrong. They reflect instead of deflect. They commit to improvement instead of avoidance. Trust creates the emotional safety required for learning, and learning is the foundation of resilience. The absence of trust carries hidden costs. It erodes morale, increases turnover, and weakens loyalty. People may stay physically present, but they disengage emotionally. Over time, this disengagement becomes cultural decay. Leaders respond with more rules and more pressure, mistaking symptoms for solutions. But trust cannot be demanded. It must be earned through consistent behavior, transparency, and a demonstrated commitment to people over ego. Trust grows when leaders listen more than they speak, explain decisions instead of hiding them, and take responsibility when things go wrong. It grows when leaders prioritize fairness over favoritism and long-term health over short-term wins. These actions signal to people that they are valued and protected. When trust becomes the norm, cooperation feels effortless, performance becomes sustainable, and resilience emerges not as an emergency response, but as a natural state of being within systems designed to support human connection. Fear is one of the most powerful motivators available to leaders. And that is precisely why it is so dangerous. Fear can produce immediate action. It can drive compliance, urgency, and short-term gains. When deadlines loom and consequences are severe, people move quickly. But speed is not strength, and results achieved through fear are rarely sustainable. Over time, fear-based leadership weakens the very people and systems it is meant to drive forward. Short-term results achieved through fear rely on pressure rather than purpose. People work harder not because they believe in the mission, but because they are afraid of what will happen if they do not comply. This creates a transactional relationship with work. Effort becomes a means of avoiding punishment, rather than contributing to something meaningful. While numbers may improve temporarily, the human cost accumulates quietly in the form of stress, anxiety, and disengagement. Fear changes behavior at a fundamental level. When people feel threatened, they become risk-averse. They avoid experimentation. They stop offering ideas that might be misunderstood or criticized. Innovation requires psychological safety, and fear eliminates it. In fear-driven environments, people choose the safest option, not the best one. Over time, this leads to stagnation. Organizations lose their ability to adapt, not because they lack intelligence or creativity, but because fear suppresses both. Short-term thinking reinforces this damage. Leaders focus solely on immediate results, prioritize speed over wisdom and efficiency over sustainability. Decisions are made to satisfy the next report, the next target, or the next performance review without considering long-term consequences. People are pushed beyond reasonable limits, processes are cut short, and values are compromised. What looks like success in the moment often becomes instability later. Fear-based systems also erode trust. When people feel manipulated or threatened, they stop believing that leaders have their best interests at heart. Communication becomes guarded. Feedback disappears. Problems are hidden instead of solved. Leaders may interpret this silence as agreement or alignment, but in reality, it is withdrawal. Trust cannot coexist with fear, and without trust, cooperation collapses. At an organizational level, fear creates dependency on authority. People wait for instructions instead of taking initiative. Responsibility shifts upward as individuals protect themselves from blame. Leaders become bottlenecks, forced to make more decisions because no one else feels safe doing so. This centralization slows progress and increases fragility. When leaders are absent or overwhelmed, the system struggles to function. The impact extends beyond organizations into society itself. Fear-based leadership normalizes inequality and exploitation by framing them as necessary sacrifices for progress. People are told to accept exhaustion, insecurity, and imbalance as the price of success. Over time, this erodes social trust. Communities fracture. Individuals compete instead of cooperate. The collective sense of responsibility weakens as people focus on self-preservation rather than shared well-being. Short-term, fear-driven systems also distort values. When outcomes are prioritized above all else, ethics become flexible. Corners are cut. People are treated as expendable. The message becomes clear. Results matter more than integrity. This corrodes character at every level, from leadership to frontline contributors. Over time, people internalize these norms, perpetuating cycles of pressure and mistrust even when formal leadership changes. The most damaging consequence of fear-based leadership is how it reshapes identity. People begin to see themselves not as contributors with agency, but as liabilities to be managed. Confidence erodes. Pride in work disappears. The gap between what people are capable of and what they are allowed to contribute grows wider. Fear does not just reduce performance. It diminishes potential. Societies built on fear and short-term thinking struggle to sustain progress. They may grow quickly, but they grow unevenly. Gains are concentrated while costs are distributed. Resentment builds. Cynicism spreads. When people lose faith that systems are fair or that leaders care, participation declines. Engagement in civic, professional, and communal life weakens, leaving institutions hollow and fragile. True strength is built through trust, purpose, and long-term thinking. Results achieved through these means may take longer, but they endure. Fear may create movement, but it cannot create commitment. Systems that rely on fear eventually collapse under the weight of the very pressure that once fueled them, leaving behind exhausted people, weakened organizations, and societies struggling to rebuild trust was sacrificed for results that were never meant to last. Leadership is often misunderstood as status, authority, or control. We associate leadership with power, decision-making, and visibility. But at its core, leadership is not about being above others. It is about being responsible for others. It is a commitment to serve a cause that transcends personal ambition and to protect the people entrusted to your care. The moment leadership becomes about self-interest, it stops being leadership and becomes management of ego. Serving a cause bigger than oneself provides leaders with moral clarity. It defines priorities when choices are difficult and trade-offs are unavoidable. Leaders who are anchored in purpose do not ask what will make them look good in the moment. They ask what will best serve the mission and the people who believe in it. This perspective shifts leadership from a position of entitlement to one of stewardship. Power becomes a tool, not a reward. Protection is one of the most overlooked responsibilities of leadership. Protecting people does not mean shielding them from challenge or holding them to lower standards. It means creating conditions where they can face challenges without fear of humiliation, abandonment, or exploitation. Leaders who protect their people stand between them and unnecessary harm, absorbing pressure so others can focus on their work. This act of protection builds trust, and trust is what allows people to give more of themselves willingly. When leaders prioritize personal success over collective well-being, systems become transactional. People are valued for what they produce rather than who they are. Loyalty flows upward but rarely returns downward. In such environments, people comply, but they do not commit. They follow rules, not beliefs. Over time, this erodes culture and weakens performance because people do their jobs without investing their hearts or creativity. Leadership rooted in service recognizes that people are not tools for achieving results, but partners in pursuing a shared purpose. This mindset changes how decisions are made. Short-term gains that harm people are no longer acceptable trade-offs. Growth is measured not only by output, but by the health, learning, and resilience of the organization. Leaders understand that the true cost of success includes its impact on human lives. Protective leadership also requires humility. Leaders must accept that they are fallible, and that their role is not to have all the answers, but to create environments where answers can emerge. This involves listening deeply, inviting dissent, and valuing perspectives that challenge authority. By doing so, leaders signal that the mission is more important than their ego. People are more willing to take responsibility when they know their voice matters. Serving a cause bigger than oneself also creates continuity. Leaders come and go, but causes endure. When leadership is centered on purpose rather than personality, systems become less dependent on individuals and more resilient over time. People understand what they are working toward and why it matters, even in moments of transition or uncertainty. This shared understanding strengthens identity and belonging. The responsibility of leadership extends beyond organizational boundaries. Decisions made in positions of influence shape families, communities, and future generations. Leaders who act without regard for this broader impact may achieve personal success while leaving lasting damage. True leadership considers not only immediate outcomes, but long-term consequences. It asks whether success is sustainable and whether it leaves people better than it found them. Protection also means holding firm to values under pressure. Leaders are often tested not when things are easy, but when fear, urgency, or competition tempt compromise. Choosing to protect people and principles in those moments requires courage. It may mean sacrificing speed, profit, or approval. But these sacrifices reinforce trust and signal that the cause is real, not rhetorical. When leaders serve something bigger than themselves, they inspire others to do the same. People begin to see their work as a contribution rather than a transaction. They support one another because they feel supported. They take pride in belonging to something that stands for more than individual gain. Leadership becomes a force that elevates rather than exploits, creating systems where success is shared, dignity is preserved, and responsibility is understood not as a burden, but as an honor that comes with the privilege of being trusted with the lives and efforts of others. At the end of it all, leadership comes down to a simple choice. We can build systems that extract performance through fear, or we can build environments that inspire commitment through trust. We can chase short-term results that exhaust people and fracture society, or we can invest in long-term purpose that strengthens individuals, organizations, and communities at the same time. People do not follow titles, strategies, or slogans. They follow leaders who make them feel safe, who give meaning to their effort, and who prove through their actions that humans matter more than numbers. The responsibility now belongs to each of us. Leadership is not reserved for those at the top. It belongs to anyone willing to take responsibility for the people and principles in their care. It begins with clarity of why, continues through empathy and courage, and is sustained by the discipline to think beyond ourselves. When we choose to serve something bigger than our own success, we create trust. When we create trust, people show up fully. And when people feel safe enough to care, they do not just work harder or follow longer, they build, protect, and carry forward the future we claim to believe in.